Welcome to Life Stories, where everyday moments turn into extraordinary lessons. Today, we bring you the story of Jessica, a young waitress at Canyon Grill who thought she was just serving another customer only to discover he was far more than he appeared. What began as a frustrating shift filled with snark and impatience transformed into a life-changing encounter that taught her the power of kindness and self-reflection. Subscribe to Life Stories to join us on this heartfelt journey and discover how one small interaction can leave a lasting impact. Let's begin today's story. It was a warm, golden afternoon in Sedona, Arizona. The kind where the sun spills through the windows, painting everything with a serene glow. At Canyon Grill, a modest but charming restaurant nestled along a bustling main street. The lunch rush was in full swing. The mix of rustic wood and modern decor gave the place a cozy, inviting air. But none of that mattered to Jessica, a 23-year-old waitress. For her, it was just another exhausting day at work. Jessica had been on her feet since morning, juggling a never-ending stream of orders, complaints, and chaos. Her dark ponytail swayed as she darted between tables, clutching her notepad and scribbling furiously. Table 7 wanted extra dressing. Table 5 needed a split check. Table 3 complained their steak was undercooked. She couldn't catch a break, and the strain was starting to show. What made it worse was the stream of rude customers. In the past hour alone, 3 tables had left her with nothing but a few measly coins as a tip. Each time, her frustration deepened. But she couldn't afford to show it. Jessica pasted on her customer service smile, a mask that grew thinner with every passing moment. When the man walked in, she barely noticed him at first. He wasn't flashy or demanding. In fact, he slipped in so quietly that Jessica only spotted him when her coworker nudged her and said, "You've got table 12. Jessica sighed and looked toward the corner where he had settled. He seemed ordinary enough. A man in his 80s with a slightly wrinkled flannel shirt, faded jeans, and a well-worn Stetson hat resting on the table. His boots spoke of a lifetime spent on dusty roads. To Jessica, he looked like someone who would order a single coffee and leave her $1, if that. "Great," she muttered under her breath. Grabbing her notepad, she approached his table with her practiced smile, though her tone betrayed her impatience. "What can I get you today?" she asked, her pen poised to jot down the order. The man looked up, his sharp eyes meeting hers. For a moment, Jessica hesitated. There was something about him, something calm, composed, yet undeniably commanding. His voice was low and gravelly when he finally spoke. "Just a burger, please." "Burger. Got it. Anything else?" she asked, tapping her pen against the notepad. "No'm," he replied, tipping his hat slightly. Jessica rolled her eyes as she turned away, muttering to herself, Really?" The irritation lingered as she placed the order in the kitchen, brushing off the odd sense that something about this man stood out. When she returned with his burger, she was running on fumes. The plate clattered onto the table with less care than usual, her smile now a mere shadow of politeness. "Here you go," she said, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "Anything else?" The man glanced at the plate, then back at her. "No, this looks just fine. Thank you." Jessica lingered for a moment, unsure why she hadn't already moved on to the next table. Something about his calm demeanor annoyed her. Everyone else in the restaurant was either snapping fingers or complaining, but not him. He seemed unbothered, almost as if he were observing the chaos around him with quiet amusement. "You're not from around here, are you?" she asked abruptly, leaning against the edge of the table. "No, I'm not," he replied simply, cutting his burger in half with precise movements. Jessica smirked. "Thought so." The hat gave it away. "Looks like you just stepped out of an old Western movie." The man smiled faintly, a curve of his lips so subtle it was barely there. "Something like that," he said. Jessica expected him to bristle at her remark, but he didn't. Instead, his calmness only heightened her frustration. She was tired of holding back. Tired of being polite to people who didn't seem to care. Well, enjoy your meal, she said, pushing herself off the table and walking away. But as she cleared a nearby table, she felt his gaze on her. Not in a creepy way, but in a way that made her feel seen, evaluated. Even. It unsettled her. Though she couldn't pinpoint why. Jessica had no idea that this unassuming man would soon teach her a lesson she'd never forget. As the lunch rush began to fade, Canyon Grill quieted, leaving Jessica with a brief moment to catch her breath. She leaned against the counter, scrolling through her phone absent-mindedly while keeping an eye on her tables. The man at table 12 was still there, slowly finishing his burger. He seemed in no hurry, sipping water and glancing around the restaurant with an air of calm curiosity. "Hey, Jess," her coworker Danny said as he walked by. "Isn't it weird how chill that guy is? It's like he's just taking it all in." Jessica shrugged without looking up. "Some people have all the time in the world, I guess." Danny chuckled. "Maybe he's famous or something. He looks kind of familiar. Don't you think?" Jessica rolled her eyes. "Famous? Yeah. Right. If he's famous, then I'm the Queen of England." Danny raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. Jessica wasn't in the mood for idle speculation. Instead, she grabbed the check for table 12 and walked over, determined to keep the interaction brief. "Here's your check," she said, placing it on the table with a faint smile. "Whenever you're ready." The man glanced at the check but didn't pick it up immediately. Instead, he looked up at her, his sharp eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her pause. "Do you enjoy your job?" he asked, his tone calm but deliberate. The question caught Jessica off guard. Her smile faltered as she hesitated. "It's fine," she said with a shrug, her voice tinged with defensiveness. "It's a job, you know?" He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "A job's what you make of it," he said after a moment. "But it seems like you're carrying a lot today." Jessica felt her cheeks flush. Who was he to comment on her attitude? "Look," she said, crossing her arms. "I've had a rough shift. Okay. Not everyone gets to sit around eating burgers and handing out life advice." To her surprise, the man didn't seem offended. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, a faint smile playing at his lips. "Fair enough," he said. "But sometimes, how you treat people in those moments says more about you than you think." Jessica opened her mouth to respond. But before she could, he stood up and reached into his pocket for his wallet. "I'll leave you with that thought," he said, placing a few bills on the table. "Thanks for the meal." As he walked toward the door, Jessica muttered under her breath, "Yeah, whatever. Cowboy." But then something unexpected happened. The restaurant manager, Carol, emerged from the back office, her face lighting up as she spotted the man. She hurried over to him, extending her hand enthusiastically. "Mr. Eastwood, I wasn't expecting you today," Carol said, her voice filled with respect. Jessica froze, her stomach dropping as she replayed the name in her head. "Eastwood. Sam Eastwood." She whipped her head toward the door, her eyes widening as she saw him turn back briefly to shake Carol's hand. His gaze met Jessica's for a fleeting moment, a knowing look passing between them before he walked out. Jessica stood frozen in place, her notepad clutched tightly in her hand. Sam Eastwood. The Sam Eastwood. Not only had she brushed off a Hollywood icon, but he was also the owner of Canyon Grill. Her heart pounded as Carol turned toward her, beaming. "Jessica, can you believe it? Mr. Eastwood stopped by today. He's been so busy lately. I haven't seen him in weeks." Jessica's voice barely rose above a whisper. "Ah, yeah. That's, wow." Carol didn't notice Jessica's discomfort. "You know, this place means the world to him," she continued. "He's so hands-on, every detail here is something he's personally approved. That's why we always remind staff to bring their best. You never know when he'll stop by." Jessica felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Every word she'd said to him replayed in her mind. Every snarky comment. Every eye roll. Her cheeks burned with humiliation. Danny noticed her pale face. "You okay?" he asked. I think I need a minute," Jessica muttered, retreating to the break room. As soon as the door closed behind her, she let out a shaky breath and sank into a chair. How could she have been so oblivious? She'd been working at Canyon Grill for 2 years and had never bothered to pay attention to the stories about the mysterious owner. If she had, maybe she would have recognized him or at least thought twice before running her mouth. Her mind was spinning, but one thought stood out. What now? The next morning, Jessica arrived at Canyon Grill with a knot of anxiety twisting in her stomach. She had barely slept the night before, replaying every moment of her interaction with Sam Eastwood. The way he looked at her, the calm yet pointed remarks, it all haunted her. What if he had told Carol about her attitude? What if she lost her job? She couldn't afford to be fired. Rent was due in 2 weeks. Her student loans were piling up. And there wasn't another job in town that could offer the same steady hours. The thought of starting over somewhere else made her head spin. Determined to stay under the radar, Jessica began her shift with uncharacteristic focus. She greeted customers with genuine smiles, apologized profusely for even the smallest mistakes, and refilled drinks before anyone had to ask. By the time lunch rolled around, she was exhausted from the effort but proud of herself for staying on top of things. Then she heard it, the low, gravelly voice she couldn't forget. "Well, looks like you're busy today." Jessica turned sharply, and there he was, Sam Eastwood, standing near the counter with his hands resting casually in his pockets. He was dressed the same as the day before, in his flannel shirt and worn jeans, but his presence felt even more commanding. Her heart sank, and she forced a nervous smile. "Ah, Mr. Eastwood, hi. I didn't know you'd be back so soon." He tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "I like to check in on my places from time to time," he said. "Keeps everyone on their toes." Jessica swallowed hard, her palms suddenly sweaty. "Right. Well, everything's running great today," she said, her voice trembling slightly. He nodded, glancing around the restaurant. "I see that. But you seem a little tense." Jessica froze. Of course. He noticed. He probably noticed everything. About yesterday." He held up a hand, cutting her off mid-sentence. "No need to apologize," he said calmly. "I'm not here to make your life harder." Jessica blinked, caught off guard by his response. "You're not." "No," he said, his voice steady. "But I do think there's a lesson here. You never know who you're talking to or what they might be going through. A little kindness goes a long way." Her throat tightened, and she didn't know how to respond. She simply nodded, feeling a lump form in her chest. "I've had bad days too," he continued, his tone softening. "But the way you handle those days says a lot about who you are. And trust me, people notice." Jessica could feel her face turning red. His words weren't harsh, but they struck a nerve. He wasn't scolding her, he was teaching her. And somehow, that made it hit harder. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I mean it." He gave her a small smile. "You're welcome. Just remember, every interaction's an opportunity. Use it well." With that, he tipped his hat and walked out, leaving Jessica standing there, overwhelmed by a swirl of emotions. For the first time in a long time, she felt something unexpected. The desire to be better. Jessica's encounter with Sam Eastwood became a turning point in her life. His words stayed with her, replaying in her mind every time she stepped onto the restaurant floor. Slowly, she began to change, not by pretending to be someone she wasn't, but by approaching her work with patience, care, and a genuine desire to connect with others. Over time, her efforts were noticed by both customers and colleagues, transforming not only her job but her outlook on life. Sometimes, the smallest interactions teach us the biggest lessons. Jessica learned that kindness and humility can make a difference, even on the hardest days. If this story inspired you, don't forget to hit the like button and share it with someone who could use a little encouragement. And be sure to subscribe to Life Stories for more real-life lessons and tales of personal growth.